There we go. Good afternoon. I'll be starting today's program with the Lent section of Bach's Orgelbüchlein. As a reminder, this set comprises 46 fairly short chorale preludes. The intention was for the set to include, I think, 164, but Bach clearly lost interest or didn't have enough time or something. And so we have 46, and today is the Lent section. And what I want you to know about this section is that it is not representative of the Orgelbüchlein overall in a few ways. First of all, it includes O Mensch, bewein, which is one of Bach's most beloved organ works. It is by far the longest piece in the Orgelbüchlein. Usually these pieces are 1 to 2 minutes. O Mensch is over 5 minutes. Second of all, the vast majority of the pieces in the Orgelbüchlein simply put the hymn tune in the top voice where you can hear it clearly without any ornamentation at all. And then the other parts beneath it are accompanimental. And the exceptions to this are usually canons. So if you don't know what a canon is, you probably do, you just don't know it. Think of Row, Row, Row Your Boat or something like that, where you have a theme that is then imitated or copied by another performer, singer, or another part on the organ. And so there are 8 of these canons in the whole Orgelbüchlein. Half of them are in the Lent section, much more so than is typical. And so one interesting thing to consider with the canons is that a canon is the most rule-oriented kind of a piece that you can have. And so why would Bach include all of these canons in the Lent section? Well, Bach often uses canons to reflect God's law and following the law. And so I think that is why the Lent section of the Orgelbüchlein is so heavy on the canons. So here it is. I forget exactly how many, maybe 8 chorale preludes from the Orgelbüchlein. Thank you. And now for the meat of the program, the Bach Fantasia and Fugue in G minor. Throughout Lent, I've been trying to include one of the big minor key Bach preludes and fugues in each program. And so I'm going to continue that for the rest of the season. Before I talk about the G minor, though, I just want to repeat something in your program, which is that we have a very special concert this Friday night at 7 p.m. right here. It is another all Bach program, and one in which I am not playing a single note, and I'm thrilled about that. I'm just waving my arms and letting other people do the work. We will have the Trinity choir and an orchestra of 18 players, mostly from the Arkansas Symphony, presenting two wonderful cantatas by Bach. The cantatas are big works for usually choir and orchestra. And in between those two cantatas, the orchestra will be playing a solo, well, not solo, but an orchestral piece without the choir, the Sinfonia in D, which is a unique piece in Bach's output. It's essentially a one-movement violin concerto. And our soloist, Drew Irvin, one of the concertmasters of the Arkansas Symphony, he says that it is the hardest piece that Bach wrote for solo violin with orchestra. So I hope you'll join us on Friday at 7. So the Bach G minor. The Fantasia is one of the most harmonically daring pieces that Bach wrote for the organ, I think. It's typical in a Baroque piece to, if you're in a minor key, you might visit 2 or 3 other minor keys. Bach visits 10 of them, 10 out of the 12 possible minor keys. And not only does he go to many keys, but the ways he moves in between keys is very, very progressive. And it's the kind of things that we don't see in the standard repertoire until you get to maybe Mendelssohn and Schumann 100 years later. So it's very forward-looking. The fugue is based on a Dutch folk song, and it's one of Bach's real pedal showpieces. It's a relentlessly difficult pedal line, but it's also ingeniously written so that the pedal line is, I'd say, maybe sometimes not as hard as it looks. Thank you all for being here today, and I hope to see you next week and this Friday. Amen.